Good day and welcome to my lecture. This is entitled She Sows, Seeds of Hope, Intersectional Feminism in Urban Agriculture in the Philippines. My name is Dr. Beverly Sarza and I am from the Philosophy Department of De La Salle University, Manila. This research employs intersectional feminist analysis on the emergence of urban agriculture during the COVID-19 pandemic in the Philippines. Intersectional feminism asserts that oppression is a compounded reality, aspects of inequalities that transpire within the separate spheres of sex, gender, race, age, and class overlap, creating an intricate web of oppression. For this reason, in unearthing the depths of marginalization, these intersecting realities must be assessed. With this research evaluates the experiences of women urban agriculturists during the pandemic. Towards the end, this paper recommends that a compassionate and responsive post-pandemic food resiliency program must be inclusive, just, and dignifying, most especially to the sector that feeds its nation. When the COVID-19 pandemic hit the Philippines, access to food and essential goods have become more limited. To avoid mass gathering, establishments such as markets and grocery stores were closed. Eventually, the entire Filipino workforce needed to either continue working from home or close permanently. These reasons, plus the insurmountable risk of exposure to the dreaded virus, prompted lots of Filipinos to resort to urban agriculture. Generally, this involves planting and eventually harvesting crops and/or raising animals that can be used for personal, household, or even community usage or sustenance. Since cities are highly populated or dense, urban farmers prefer vertical gardening, balcony herb farming, or backyard vegetable gardening. According to various studies on the prevalence of urban farming during the pandemic, most home or community gardeners are women. Such phenomenon gave birth to the term plantita, which means plant lover or nurturer. The term itself highlights the gendered aspect of urban farming. In terms of crisis, women are the key to food resiliency, environmental sustainability, and economic recovery. On the other hand, the term also overshadows the different inequalities that women urban farmers face. They are overworked, yet underpaid, overburdened, yet underrepresented. As the country prepares itself for post-pandemic recovery, this research claims that an effective plan on agriculture and food resiliency necessitates the consideration of intersectional feminism, since, I quote, "all inequality is not created equal." Intersectional feminist analysis, as coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, shows the way that people's social identities can overlap, creating compounding experiences of discrimination. The determinants of oppression, race, gender, age, and economic status are varied and affect differently. For this reason, to address this discrimination, these overlapping realities must be unearthed and assessed. With these, the discussion of this paper is divided into three: intersectional feminism, structural and representational intersectionality, and urban agriculturalists, and conclusion. Towards the end, through this framework, this paper recommends that a compassionate and responsive post-pandemic food resiliency program must be inclusive, just, and dignifying, most especially to the sector that feeds its nation. Intersectional feminism, as an analytic approach, attempts to disentangle different patterns or causes of oppression, is traceable to Black feminism. Kimberly Crenshaw, an American philosopher, lawyer, and professor of law, initially coins intersectionality as an interaction between gender, race, and other categories of difference in individual lives, social practices, institutional arrangements, and cultural ideologies, and the outcomes of these social interactions in terms of power. Since discrimination is deeply rooted, an intersectional feminist approach necessitates an evaluation of its different sources, which are oftentimes overlooked. The appropriate response then recognizes these marginal aspects such as race, gender, sexual orientation, and even economic status. In championing civil rights and anti-racist policies, Crenshaw asserts that white women's experiences of racism cannot account for black women's and vice versa. The experience of racism is surely different for black men and black women, for white men and white women, just as white women and black women may experience sexism differently. It is through this recognition of the various lived experiences of an individual's narratives on oppression, each unalike and has its own merits, makes intersectional feminism different. It therefore conceptualizes such categories as interacting with and constituting one another to create unique social locations that vary according to time. Even if the seed of intersectional feminism germinates from Black feminism, its relevance in addressing oppression is recognized in other fields. The field that I will be discussing is agricultural studies. According to Bobby J. Smith II, a sociologist and professor, in his research he presents case studies of Black farmers and queer farmers to show how these two groups create and recreate emancipatory spaces for farming, food, and community. Essentially, this study argues against the traditional narrative of Americans' food justice system that farming solely belongs to white heterosexual men. Likewise, in a study conducted by International Food Policy Research Institute entitled Intersectionality and Addressing Equity in Agriculture, Nutrition, and Health, asserts that to properly address the issues of inequity, there is a need to recognize the multiple overlapping ways on how people are marginalized. To evaluate inequalities that urban agriculturalists experienced during the pandemic, this study borrows two approaches from Crenshaw. Initially, she presents three main conceptual methods: structural intersectionality, which refers to the oppression in the intersection of race and gender; political intersectionality pertains to political or policies that generate violence against women; and in representational intersectionality focuses on cultural construction, stereotypes, and narratives that exacerbates oppression. For this study, the discussion on urban agriculture during the pandemic focuses on structural and representational approaches only. The term urban agriculture simply refers to growing or producing food in urban places or cities. An example in the Philippines is the Sharon Farm in Quezon City. In a study conducted by Barameda called The Joy of Urban Farming Project, she highlights some of the gendered aspect of urban agriculture. Most urban farmers are women, and they are being primarily responsible for food preparation and consumption in the household. They are the ones pressured to look for food when it is not readily available. With women's home gardens, households are able to smoothen out fluctuations in consumption and incomes. Yet such contribution is not distinctly recognized and valued because it is indirectly masked as part of women's domestic responsibilities. Prior to the pandemic, data proves that 23% of the agricultural workforce are women. In fact, the agriculture sector is one of the largest sectors of women's employment, but they are unrecognized and underrepresented. Even if such is the case, the existing wage gap between male and female is staggering. The tasks delegated to women include planting, manual weeding, and crop establishment are accorded lower salaries, as opposed to duties designated to men, which are plowing, land preparation, and care of irrigation canals. Women farmers earn less compared to male farmers, perform household chores, manage the household budget. When it comes to land ownership or property rights, women are less likely to inherit, much less their own land. Overburdened by farm work and household responsibilities, women agriculturalists generally do not have proper access to health services. During the pandemic, these inequalities are reinforced. Ofelia Bagotlo, founding member of the Homeless People's Federation of the Philippines, shares that in a community farm she organizes in Payatas, Quezon City, the essential component of their effort are grassroots women. Initially working with 3 women volunteers only, their group expanded to 38, with still more women working than men. They earn a little while providing food and good nutrition as well during the pandemic. Moreover, since the Philippines records the longest lockdown in the world, the quarantine measures prevented women from selling their produce. Aside from this, the virus also generated a shadow pandemic, or gender-based violence, which transpires globally. Incidents of femicide and domestic abuse increased since women are locked inside their houses with their perpetrators. In Metro Manila alone, there are 5,040 cases of violence against women and children reported at the start of the quarantine. This is understood to be underreported since all government efforts are mostly centered on the Aside from the shadow pandemic, women urban agriculturalists also experience what the economists term as the she-cession, because of its disproportionate and lingering impact on women's finances and economic prospects. Among those women are indigenous farmers. Lockdown and border restrictions prevent them from marketing their harvest. Due to the virus, indigenous women farmers also worry about their access to health services and education. Conclusion and recommendations. Through structural intersectionality, we discovered that although the pandemic is a global phenomenon, Filipino women urban agriculturalists are mostly affected. Since almost all workforce has been halted, they needed to earn more and nurture more both at the same time. Even if they are overburdened already, they are still underpaid and underrepresented, since household chores and gardening are both unpaid jobs. In the Philippines, women perform more domestic tasks more than men, both prior and during the pandemic. On top of these, the pandemic forced women to be with their perpetrators of domestic abuse. Also, access to reproductive health services is disrupted during the lockdown. Through representational intersectionality, we discovered that women are underappreciated in the field of agriculture is because of the stereotype that toiling the land or seas solely belongs to men. Even if 20% of farmers and fisherfolk are women who also work hard to contribute, their salary is not at par with their men counterpart. Another reason is the lack of participation of women in essential agencies that perform important decision-making. Yet during the pandemic, a study proves that women are at the forefront of COVID-19 response in healthcare. Since the government is preparing for post-pandemic food resiliency plan, these intersecting realities must be recognized and addressed. The pre-existing marginalization of agricultural workers causes the Philippines, which is considered as an agricultural nation, to lag behind its neighboring Southeast Asian nations, such as Vietnam and Thailand. In short, it must provide equal and just compensation to all farmers, farm workers, and fisher folk regardless of sex, gender, and orientation. If 60% of our nation's agriculturalists are women who perform well and are compensated better, appreciated more, and well represented, then our nation can foresee a future that is healthy and wealthy. The system must also protect the dignity of laborers by providing access to healthcare and education, especially to girls, the elderly, and the indigenous. The pandemic exacerbates the pre-existing marginalization. Women, senior citizens, children, IP, persons with disabilities, and solo parents have compounded burdens. An inclusive post-pandemic recovery plan should highly consider the roles that women play, especially the urban agriculturalists who are feeding and nurturing the nation. Here are my references, and thank you very much for attending my lecture.